Hello and welcome to another edition of Agenda 2063 TV show, the only show in Ghana, the region, the continent, telling you authentic stories about Africa's development. But although we spend the better part of the series talking about different areas of the African Continental Free Trade Area, what we're always trying to do is still remind you that the Agenda 2063 is very, very important, very critical to our understanding of how Africa works. My name is E.K Bensah Jr. Thank you for welcoming me into your homes, your laptops, or wherever else you may be. We hope that will give you a great show. We're going to take a break in a minute, then we'll be right back with Ear on East Africa. Welcome to another edition of Here on East Africa. This is an important segment where we give you developments around East Africa, everything else, what's going on, and so on and so forth. So we're going to start off with elections. It looks like everyone is having elections all over the place. So on the political front in Tanzania, Tanzanian President John Magufuli has won a resounding election victory with 84% of the votes after the national elections. He was consequently awarded a winner's certificate in Dodoma, which is another of the important capitals, where he said he is indebted to Tanzanians as he takes power for a second 5-year term and has promised to work with opposition candidates in his bid to deliver to the expectations of the people, whom he thanked for his landslide victory. However, his main rival, Tundu Lissu, said the elections were riddled with irregularities, such as ballot box stuffing, and also other usual things that protesters call for, and so has called for protests over the election results. He was subsequently arrested and interrogated for over 2 hours by police in Dar es Salaam, saying it was related to planned protests over election results. He has since been released. Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia have restarted Nile mega dam talks. Sudan is only important in this conversation, even though we're talking about East Africa, because it links up to Ethiopia. We're talking about the Grand Renaissance Dam. Now, discussions with Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia kicked off the latest round of talks over Addis Ababa's controversial dam on the Blue Nile. Those are the waters that are critical to the two downstream nations. The week-long negotiations, held via video conference for once, include water ministers from the three countries, as well as representatives from the African Union, European Union, and the World Bank. Previous three-way talks have failed to produce an agreement on the filling and operation of the vast reservoir behind the 145-meter tall hydropower Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD. Egypt, which depends on the Nile for about 97% of its irrigation and drinking water, sees the dam as an existential threat. Sudan hopes the dam will help regulate flooding, but has also warned that the millions of lives would be at great risk if Ethiopia unilaterally fills the dam. Meanwhile, Ethiopia views the project as essential for its electrification and development and insists that the flow of water downstream will not be affected. We'll move over to some not so savory news in Ethiopia, where at least 54 people have been killed in that country, according to Amnesty International. At least 54 people were killed in a rebel attack in Ethiopia's restive Oromia region at the weekend. According to Amnesty International, survivors of the massacre have counted 54 bodies in a schoolyard in the village of Gawa Kanka, which was targeted late on Sunday by suspected members of the Oromo Liberation Army, OLA. Most of the victims were women and children and elderly people, according to survivors who hid in nearby forests. The incident is likely to ramp up pressure on the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, winner of last year's Nobel Peace Prize, to help improve security in a country that is struggling with ethnic violence. The violence has occurred in an area of western Ethiopia known as Wolega and involved up to 60 armed and unarmed assailants. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has said in an important statement. They said the assailants targeted members of the Amara ethnic group, Ethiopia's second largest, and victims were dragged from their homes and taken to a school where they were killed. Obviously not very good news at all. We hope to be getting important updates on this going forward. Now finally, still with bad news and still with COVID, and returning to Kenya, Nairobi. Nairobi is staring at a full-blown COVID-19 health crisis. You may have heard that in Europe, there's a so-called second wave, and we felt that Africa was isolated, but now we see that it's hitting Kenya, and according to people in Kenya that we've been doing checks with, they confirmed this to be true, that Kenya's capital city, Nairobi, could be plunged into a full-blown health crisis with intensive care units set aside for COVID-19 patients almost at capacity. The infectious diseases chief at Kenyatta National Hospital, Lois Ombanjo, has raised concerns that health facilities in the capital are quickly running out of beds as the daily COVID-19 cases surge. The country has, for October 2020, witnessed a spike in reported cases of the novel coronavirus in what is feared to be a second wave. COVID-19 infections in Kenya have now reportedly crossed the 50,000 mark, with cases that were first confirmed to or first confined to urban areas. Now they've moved, and now they're ravaging communities in rural areas. We keep Kenyans in our prayers. So that concludes this bit of the Year on East Africa segment. We hope to give you an important update next time we speak. So welcome back from the break, and I'm happy to be giving you the concluding part of the Tana Forum. Last week, what I tried to do was to give you an understanding of what the Tana Forum was about. This time, I'm seeking to unpack it, really open it up so that you get a sense, you feel like you are inside, you understand what was happening. So I'm going to be doing three things with this editorial. So I'm going to remind us of the relevance of the Tana Forum and the conversation on AfTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, and Agenda 2063. Secondly, I'm going to help unpack some of the sessions that dealt, at least some of the sessions through tweets, important tweets that deal with the AfTA and its role in conflict transformation. The link is not always so clear, but the tweets will help us understand that, as well as highlights of some of the Tana Forum papers that were important parts of that whole meeting. Then finally, I'm going to offer a highlight of my presentation on how to make AfTA work. Just a brief overview of my presentation on that 24th October 2020, all with a view to setting the stage for a post-Tana conversation on AfTA, peace and security. So let's start off with the first important thing about linking up with reminding us of the link between of the relevance of Tana Forum in the conversation on AfTA and Agenda 2063. Well, Agenda 2063 is something that we've always been talking about, obviously, but the Tana Forum, AfTA and Agenda 2063, the reason why all of them come and cohere is this. This 2020 was supposed to be a year of silencing the guns. What we did and what we have been doing for the past year has been silencing COVID. We have not been able to silence the guns necessarily because we've been paying a lot of attention to public health issues, as we saw in the Year in East Africa, where Kenya is dealing with the second wave. So even as we want to silence the guns, so much attention and resources have been put to silencing COVID that you could be forgiven for thinking that we have forgotten about silencing the guns. The thing is, we have not. The AU certainly has not either. But what can it do? It needs to save lives. It needs to save people. And that's why the Africa CDC has been doing great work, making sure that we all understand, keep up to date on what, COVID, the impact of COVID on Africa. But nonetheless, we cannot leave the year without still forgetting, without remembering the fact that this was supposed to be a year in which we say no more conflict, no more insecurity, and so on and so forth. Even though that was unlikely to be the whole issue. You will always have terrorists, you always have freedom fighters, but at least we could get to the stage where it will be minimized. But it is still important that we remember that 2020 is a year, despite COVID, that we should never ever forget that the silence in the guns, even if we do not complete it this year, we must revisit it in a way that reminds us that terrorism and all these bad things that happen around the world should be a thing of the past going forward. Africa does not need this kind of thing. We need peace, we need security, we need democracy. So Tana Forum is important because what it does is it offers us a comprehensive approach to understanding the dynamics inherent in peace and security, including an opportunity to speak to very high-level people who possess a bird's-eye view of conflict, peace, and security. Let me explain. A bird's-eye view in the sense that some of them have not just ambassadors, but they've actually worked in the conflict space. They've worked in the field. They know the impact of that conflict on ordinary people, and therefore are able to speak frankly and candidly about why we need to find resolutions to that conflict. Whilst it is true that there are people who benefit from conflicts, there will always be people who benefit from chaos. That's the way the world is. Africa has gotten to the stage where we need to make sure that despite these things that happen, these challenges, we need to make sure that we bring an end as much as possible to conflict, whether it's through civil society, whether it's through private sector, whether it's through whichever form. And now that African Continental Free Trade Area, if there is a way in which we can find a way to find different areas of AFTA to help bring some peace around the continent, then we must do it, because if we don't have peace of mind to do anything, how can AFTA work? How can we begin to trade? Because we are too busy thinking about the conflict or the insecurity that is around us. And so we must make an effort going forward. And Tana does that to remind us that we must make an effort to make sure that peace and security still is on the table, even though we have COVID distracting us. We need to stay alive to think through how we approach problems, and therefore addressing the peace and security issues on the continent needs to still be there. Even in 2021, when COVID would have calmed down, God willing, and when public health issues would have also calmed down, we still need to remember that insecurity does not help any corner of the continent. We need to put an end to it so that we can all do business, we can move freely across the continent, and we can find ways in which we can pay reduced fees to travel wherever we need to travel and make this continent a great continent. But what we must remember, and the relevance of the Tana in this first part that I'm talking about, if Tana Forum did not exist, we would certainly have to invent it, because there's no way in which we can discuss trading among nations. Let's say Togo, Ghana and Togo, the way in which our grandparents and relatives have been doing business across those borders. If those borders have been fighting, how on earth would you have been making money across those borders? It doesn't make sense. So what we must remember is that, especially across the border regions, which are many across the continent, we need to be at peace so that we can trade and then we can make money. It is these little things that at least help people take their kids, their grandkids to school and so on and so forth, and give them a good education. We cannot expect everyone to be a doctor or lawyer, all these middle-class professional people. But at least what we can expect is that everybody has a decent right to work, a decent right to living. And so peace and security ensures that. And what Tana Forum does is that it reminds us that that peace and security across the continent, across our borders, is so critical. And even at a time that COVID has hit, we must still remember to be as peaceful as we can. But buried in that peace is the fact that we also need to move freely. In West Africa, we can move freely. We can move around all the 15 countries, but it is not the same from West Africa to East Africa, West Africa to Southern Africa, West Africa to North Africa. Visa problems. And so that is one of the things going forward. We must remember freedom of movement also comes with visa issues, visa considerations, visa challenges. And on the continent, we must do away with these visa issues. We've made progress, but more can be done. And so we pray and believe and we know, and definitely in future conversations, on Agenda 2063, we will be talking about migration and also aspects of freedom of movement, because we need to get to the stage where 2021, where the African Continental Free Trade Area starts, we should all be moving freely across without visas, across East Africa, North Africa, Central Africa. Visa problems should be a thing of the past. So let's work towards that important goal. Peace and security also means freedom of movement, which also means visa issues. So the three are linked, and so we must bear that in mind as we work on creating the Africa we want, which is what Agenda 2063 talks about. To the second point, unpacking some of the sessions that dealt with the African Continental Free Trade Area and its role in conflict transformation. Like I said earlier, the Tana Forum was trying to help people, remind people that even though they were talking peace and security as the primary issue, African Continental Free Trade Area was an important discussion. Therefore, we're just offering you some tweets that will help give you an insight of what some people were saying, because the link is not always so obvious. Some of the tweets include this one. I think it was made by one of the diplomats there. It said the African Continental Free Trade Area is a game changer, which can help in dealing with the root causes of conflict in Africa, in which the main cause of conflict is poverty. So yes, of course, poverty creates conflict, because if you're poor, as in dead poor, that is no money, left, right, center, you'll be angry and wonder whether it is not better to go and attack a rich person's place so that you can take something and have a little bit of food. So we must also bear that in mind going forward, that abject poverty is something that must be a thing of the past now that African Continental Free Trade Area is here. Poverty will always be there, but at least poverty which includes the recognition that there's some level of social security, that even if the people are poor, they may not be earning $1,000, okay, but at least if they are earning $200 or $100, but at least have security, social security that will protect them from health crises, from whatever else. That is the way we go, because we cannot expect everyone to be prosperous or everyone to be rich, but we must also not expect everyone to be poor. That cannot happen once AfTA is here. These are some of the things, hard questions we need to confront going forward in the conversation on African Continental Free Trade Area, which goes to the next tweet, which talks about inclusive trade. Another of the participants said, if we are looking at inclusive trade, the possibility of that through AfTA would lead to sustainable peace. There's a mutually reinforcing relationship between inclusive trade and sustainable peace, which is to basically say that trade should not just be for the sake of trade. Trade needs to involve everybody. And when we say everybody, it means that it's inclusive. So it means that the rich guy, the poor guy, the average guy, the middle class guy, all of them get to benefit from the trade. It is not that the rich guy is able to import 15 containers and then the other guy doesn't get anything from those containers that have been imported. So the most important thing in this is about inclusive trade and sustainable peace. They say that peace is not the absence of conflict, that's what Martin Luther King, but the presence of justice. So we must also bear that in mind going forward when you talk about peace and sustainable peace. And I think these were some of the things Tana Forum was trying to remind us, that yes, sustainable peace and security are important discussions, but sustainable peace is what we must talk about. An important conversation, an important quote that also came up from the high-level forum, Tana's high-level forum, was about conflict. Quotation, which said that conflict has a devastating impact on trade, with trade levels dropping by as much as 25 to 40% in the first year of a civil war. So which tells you that when people fight, it affects trade. We know that in one thing that I always talk about, AMISOM in Somalia. They've been fighting for 12, 13 years. And Somalia has, the economy has not really been doing so well because, they're so busy protecting the economy. AU troops are there, UN troops are there, whichever troops are there to protect them. And so how on earth do they make pay attention to building their economy when they're trying to fight off terrorists from Al-Shabaab. The same in northern Nigeria, where Nigeria is a rich country, but you have the northern part that is dealing with Boko Haram. And now some of them have crossed the forest through Lake Chad and so on and gone into different spaces. And Lake Chad, which is an important environmental basin for Nigeria, now cannot be sustained because the terrorists have used that place to kidnap people, to store all sorts of weapons and all sorts of things there so that they can keep on prosecuting the terrorism. That cannot be. So it has impact on the environment, it has impact on trade and so on and so forth. So conflict clearly has to be a thing of the past going forward in 2021. And some of us must be categorical about that as we talk about it. So for some of us, anytime we talk about Tana Forum, we must remind people that it isn't just peace and security, it's also about sustainable peace. And it's also about justice, because peace is not just the absence of conflict. Let's remember, Martin Luther King said, but the presence of justice. You can even link that to the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 16, which talks about peaceful, just and inclusive societies, justice, just, inclusive societies, peace and security, all very, very important things we must make a lot of noise about going forward in 2021. Now to the Tana Forum papers, just to give you a quick overview of some of the discussions that were had, some of the papers that were published, and some of them looked at the strengthening the potential of the African Continental Free Trade Area by integrating human rights. So already you can begin to see that different aspects of African Continental Free Trade Area are being added. People are looking at different areas, which is good. It is and will never just be about trade. It has to be about important areas that make sense to the ordinary individual as well. And human rights is a very, very, very core part that needs to be approached. They're also talking about, other articles were also talking about entrepreneurship, high impact entrepreneurship as an enabler for stronger intra-African trade. So how do we make sure that we put a lot of resources into entrepreneurship for African countries all over so that it helps stimulate intra-African trade? That's also a very important discussion that needs to be had going forward. Now, e-commerce, because of COVID, everyone is at home, or most people are at home trying to find data to put into their phones, into their laptops, whatever else, to do Zoom and Google Meet and all these things. What the upshot of that is that it has allowed the e-commerce framework, the e-commerce protocol of the African Continental Free Trade Area be more supported by the African Union. Now the African Union realizes that because more people are at home and they're discussing a lot more, they're not going out so much, e-commerce is important. And e-commerce was going to be the latter part of the protocols of the Continental Free Trade Area. Now they have had to, negotiators have had to discuss it earlier so that they find the important framework that works for all African countries. And so there are more and more articles that are looking at the implementation of e-commerce framework, like this one by one Dr. Sally Defo, who's writing about the implementation of an e-commerce framework within the African Continental Free Trade Area. What does it take? And what are the lessons that can be learned from Europe's digital single market? Because Europe here is an important reference so that we can begin to see what has worked in Europe, what we can pick from there as we go forward with our own e-commerce, especially now that we're doing a lot of mobile money, e-transfers and all these things. You know, we need to get it right as well. There's so many things that are involved as part of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Of course, COVID-19 is never far away. We live with it, face masks and all these things. So COVID-19 is another of the articles that one of the authors has written, the effect of COVID-19 on the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Of course, you could use one paragraph to answer that. You don't even have to write one whole article. Because already July 2020, this year, was when the African Continental Free Trade Area was supposed to take off. But COVID hit in March across the continent, and therefore July had to be postponed. That's why January 2021 we're finally going to launch it. So already that one speaks volumes. It makes so much sense. Then still on the African Continental Free Trade Area, risks and strategies, which speaks to some of the challenges that will affect the African Continental Free Trade Area going forward. Well, how can we best position, youth, entrepreneurship, all these different areas that we've always all been talking about. And then finally, the security and the African Continental Free Trade Area, opportunity for a more integrated approach to continental peace and security. So that article really speaks to the whole issue of, what it means, the Freedom of Movement Protocol and all these things, security, because the Freedom of Movement Protocol discussion in the context of AfTA needs to bring out the issues of security, because not every country is comfortable with the fact that everyone can move across their territories. Some people feel that you're coming into their territories to come and take over their jobs, especially if you have a little oil, and so on and so forth. So that is a challenge. There's a lot of that mentality in parts of Central Africa, for example, in Gabon, and some of these places where they have oil and all these things. So they feel that even their neighbors entering their territories to go and work, they'll come and take over the jobs that the people within that country should have taken over. I mean, this is something, thankfully, in ECOWAS and in West Africa and East Africa, we have done away with, because so many Togolese, for example, are in Ghana working in the real estate sector. And we have accepted it. And Ivorians are all over the place making some good food in Ghana, and we have accepted it. So this is where we need to go, understanding peace and all these things. This is the future. The freedom of movement should include an understanding that when you enter the territory, you have a right to reside and right to establish, and also a right to do whatever you want, as long as you do it within the laws of the country, and as long as it isn't at the expense of anybody else. And I think the African Continental Free Trade Area will need to remind us very, very, very strongly on some of those points around the Freedom of Movement Protocol. Now finally to the third point of really getting you to understand and unpack the Tana Forum. Just a quick overview of my presentation that day on the 24th October. What I really spoke to was that there were three things that will make the African Continental Free Trade Area work. So I spoke to the issue of predictable financing. And what I said was that in predictable financing, it meant that we needed to have money that was automatic, money that we knew would be coming to the African Continental Free Trade Area, its institutions, its people, in whichever way, shape, or form. There's a free trade area out there, fine. But what does that mean for the ordinary person? Does it mean that they can set up businesses and apply to the AU? No, that is not how it works. The African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat is there to help administer the free trade area, to help people understand that the free trade area works well, so that when you do set up businesses, let's say in Ghana, you can do it through the National Coordination Office of the African Continental Free Trade Area in Ghana, in Nigeria, whichever country else you will be, and you can then begin to start talking business. So that is the way forward on the Continental Free Trade Area. Predictable financing, in my view, needs to include that. How do we make sure that the money is quickly always available? Is it from donors? Is it from the AU? Is it from whoever else? We need to find ways. Some of the ways which I had proposed was that I've referred to as the Article 19 institutions. Article 19 institutions are the institutions that have been cited in Article 19 of the AU's Constitutive Act, which speaks to the African Central Bank, African Monetary Fund, and African Investment Bank. These have been set up in principle already. So the African Investment Bank was supposed to be in Libya, Tripoli, and then issues around conflict happened in Libya. So we don't even know what's happening to that. But in African Central Bank is already in Lagos. It's just that they're putting things in place to make sure that it works. The constitution of that bank and all these things. Then there's the African Monetary Fund, which is supposed to be in Cameroon, which has also largely been set up, but also they need to put things in place. And so what all these three institutions are supposed to do is help AU countries, member states, raise money for the member states to prosecute the agenda of integration. And so the African Continental Free Trade Area should be talking to these institutions by hook or by crook to make sure that money, whether in addition to whether donor money will come in or whether the AU will raise levies to make sure that the African Continental Free Trade Area will work, or whether African Development Bank will give after secretarial money to make sure there's money. These institutions are on paper. They need to work. So we must pay attention to them and make sure that they also we are putting pressure on our bankers across the continent to ask them questions. What have you done? What is the state of play of the African Central Bank? Where is it? In Nigeria, it's supposed to have been set up, but what is the state of play of it 5-6 years down the line? Is it going to help us raise money for the African Continental Free Trade Area? African Investment Bank, now that Libya is still in crisis, not totally out of the woods. Will this still be in Libya, or will it be moved outside Libya? African Investment Bank, you can imagine when Gaddafi, the late Gaddafi, proposed that his country should host the African Investment Bank. You know how we all know how Gaddafi was quite quote-unquote eccentric and wanted to do so much for the African continent with all the challenges that came with it. You can imagine that his country hosting the African Investment Bank, if he were alive today, what a huge edifice that may have been in Tripoli somewhere. So these are important questions that we need to ask. What are those institutions? What is the state of play of those institutions in helping create predictable financing for African Continental Free Trade Area? Then there's the issue of policy coherence, which simply is to say that what is it about the policies of the different AU institutions that will make the African Continental Free Trade Area work? So what is it about Agenda 2063? What is it about the African Governance Architecture Platform, which includes African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, the State-Owned Enterprises Network, all these, what do these institutions need to do to make sure that there is policy coherence that the African Continental Free Trade Area can work with? Because it shouldn't just be a place where they can trade freely and just free for all. There must be rules-based governance, and that's where the policy coherence comes in. And finally, sensitization and dissemination. We cannot trade under the African Continental Free Trade Area if we don't know what it's about, if we don't understand the rules of origin, if we don't understand all these other technical areas. We don't need to be economists or lawyers or experts to understand how the African Continental Free Trade Area works. Every single individual on the continent, whether it is the illiterate farmer or whether it is the most experienced trader, should understand how the African Continental Free Trade Area works. And that is why we must pay attention to sensitization and dissemination, so that we get to the stage where districts, in regions, where there's some small information outlet or media regularly updating people on what the African Continental Free Trade Area, it's an African thing. The Europeans did not create it. The Asians did not create it. We Africans, we created this Continental Free Trade Area. So what do we need to do to educate people about it at the lowest level, so that even in curriculum, to our nieces and nephews who are in school right now, at the time that they're 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old, what curriculum is there to make sure that they also understand the African Continental Free Trade Area, so that by the time that they are 18, they understand it, they know how to start doing business on the continent. This is where we need to go. That is the vision that we need to have for the African Continental Free Trade Area, where there's inclusive trade, there's peace and security, it fosters sustainable peace, and it also fosters justice. Whether social justice, economic justice, it needs to be good for the African people. All in line with Agenda 2063, but also all in line with Aspiration 7, which speaks to the fact that the AU can be a global player. So Tana Forum has been an interesting experience. And I hope that as you watch through this video and you reflect, you'll be able to go to their website, tanaforum.org, and reach out to some of the people who were there, reach out to any of us if you need some further insights so that we can help break this African Continental Free Trade Area baby down. Right now, African Continental Free Trade Area, everybody wants to do everything with it. It's become a spoiled child, a big baby. You turn left, you turn right, African Continental Free Trade Area, this, that, and so on. Let's make it work. Let's make it inclusive. Let's make it just for every single person. And let's also remind people that it is a flagship program of the Agenda 2063, a very, very important program I'm privileged to be hosting. So that anytime that you get Agenda 2063, just go through the main pages. There's so many different things that are Agenda 2063, flagship projects that are there, but the African Continental Free Trade Area is one major flagship that African member states, African policymakers have made sure it has come to light. So let's make it work. Let's not wait for donors to come and do it for us. We can do this and we can create the Africa we want, wherever we want, anytime we want. Thank you so much for giving your time in this space to come and talk to you about this all-important discussion about Tana Forum, peace and security, the African Continental Free Trade Area. There'll definitely be different aspects of it which I'll approach going forward in subsequent programs, especially the issue of freedom of movement and migration. It is a very important discussion that we need to have. Visa problems and all these things needs to be discussed. It's part of freedom of movement protocol of the African Continental Free Trade Area. We cannot trade if we cannot move freely. So that is the next conversation going forward in subsequent programs. So we hope to be bringing you some very important guests who can help us unpack those kind of important discussions. But in the meantime, wherever you are, keep checking out tv.aau.org and the great work that the AAU team right here in Accra is doing. Thank you to the producers and thank you to all of you for ensuring that we keep this program running and make it as stimulating and exciting as possible. Thank you. My name is E.K Bensah Jr. Happy to be coming your way, and we hope to come to you next week with another important and very interesting edition. Thank you. Have a great day. Goodbye.